We're very happy to be making this presentation today, and we have several outstanding panelists joining us, and you will probably see their background in the original agenda, but I will just briefly mention, we have Dr. Balzhan Arazbayeva joining us from UIIN. For those of you not familiar with it, it is a very large and very successful global organization. It stands for University Industry Innovation Network. And every year they have a wonderful annual meeting. And a lot of you probably have attended in the past. But she is going to cover for us the European ecosystem in terms of shape, subject, commercialization. And this would also include a little bit coverage on the UK. Even after Brexit, UK is still part of Europe, at least if we're not talking about political issues. This is partly because our second speaker, Kevin Van Coulter, unfortunately could not join us this morning due to a family emergency this morning. And he was to cover the UK ecosystem. And we have Balzhan graciously agreeing to cover that as well. And then we have Holland Evans joining us from down under, from Australia. And she is Business Development Manager at Queensland University of Technology. And therefore, this is her time very late in the evening. We very much appreciate her making the time available in the evening hours. So without further ado, I think we would actually first go into my presentation. If Britta or Sean could show the first slide or two. Yes, this is the beginning slide, and we can go to the next one. Yes, and let's just keep it there. This is a most substantive slide in my presentation. So I will go over these points for just about 5 minutes, and then I will hand over the floor to Balzhan for about 10 minutes because she has double duty today. And then finally, Holly will have another 5 minutes or so. Then we will have about 20-25 minutes of discussion period. And therefore, please do send in your questions. We have Lisa in the background watching the traffic in the chat room for all kinds of questions. And hopefully by that time, we will have the top several most pressing questions that Lisa could present to all of the panelists. So looking at the shape commercialization landscape in the US particularly, what do we have? A little bit of historical background is the Bayh-Dole Act was enacted back in 1980, largely lauded as the most important technology commercialization legislative piece ever, not only in the US, but also globally. And then quite a few years later, we have the 9 points. If you haven't heard about the 9 points, I have another backup slide right after this, I'll show you. And the 9 points were raised as a matter of principle back in the 2006, 2007 timeframe by 10 leading universities in the US. And by now, there are more than 110 universities globally who sign up to support the principles behind the 9 points. And they are basically the values and principles behind what we do as knowledge transfer professionals. So very interesting to read. It forms sort of the backbone of guiding principles for a lot of our actions and policies. And then we I'd like to touch on the US government programs. And for those of you from the UK, you are very familiar with the UK system, but the US have very similar parallel systems in place. In some cases, a little bit earlier than the UK system. We have a Small Business Innovation Research Program, SBIR program, that started in 1982. And then to encourage the collaboration between academic institutions and the industry in 1992, 10 years later, it was followed up by STTR. That's a Small Business Technology Transfer. That's what the STTR means. And that particular funding program requires collaboration with a research entity. So it really strongly encourages that kind of a collaboration. So in that sense, very similar to our KTP or KTN network here in the UK. And then in 2011, we started having the National Science Foundation I-Corps program, kind of a fashion after Peace Corps. But this is really for entrepreneurship training, specifically targeting academics. So in that regard, you could look at it as the precursor of our I-Corps program here in the UK. And just like the I-Corps program, I-Corps program is heavily STEM oriented. So that even until today still has no equivalent of our Aspect ARC accelerator type of training program or accelerator program specifically targeting shape subject matters. And then we talk about the university funding. Public funding actually has been decreasing for university research, and especially for university administration funding. All kinds of state universities have encountered a lot of challenges. You have read about the California state government running out of money once every few years. So the University of California system has been really severely challenged over the years. And perhaps as another interesting backdrop is that just like us, the universities, especially the public universities in the US, have been facing more and more pressure. People have been asking, what have you done lately for local economic development? So that part is just as important a topic these days as it is here. And then several numbers to share very quickly. Most of the tech transfer offices are not operating profitably. And one particular study from 2009, Ashley Stevens and two other co-authors published that only 16% of tech transfer offices are in the self-sustaining mode, meaning after they distribute the income to inventors and also to other university departments, can they cover the TTO's expenses? Only 16% answered yes. And this is, by the way, a self-select kind of a response pattern. So the actual could be a lot lower than that. So that is one very sobering statistic to share. The other is that the vast majority of the commercialization deals as well as income are actually coming from medical school. For those that have medical schools, this has been a very consistent pattern for universities with a sizable medical school, whether it's Harvard, Yale, Stanford, or University of California. So that is another interesting statistic. And finally, in general, people have been talking about this. Maybe for each $1 to $2 million US dollars of funding, you can expect one invention disclosure on the tail end of the research activities. And that, a lot of people also debate. Maybe it's more like 3 million. outside of the elite universities. This particular number is definitely not from any very, very solid research, and there have been some people running numbers, but it's a debatable number, but still it serves as a sanity checkpoint. And the most important takeaway is that in the US, there's nothing like aspect. And AUTM certainly has been very, very successful, but within AUTM, there hasn't been a specific focus on shape specific subjects. There, for example, Better World Award has been going on for more than 10 years, but most of the awardees are really from the STEM area. They happen to be social enterprise kind of research activities. So that is another very interesting thing. So therefore, I think it's great timing that we're doing all these things here in the UK. And in essence, we really have a chance to lead the world in the shape commercialization. So I'll stop right here, and perhaps we could switch gears to Bazhan. If Bazhan is given a co-host capability, she should be able to share her screen as well.
That is all right. Thank you so much. And thank you, David, for your presentation as well. Great insights. Good morning, everybody, or good evening, depending on which part of the world are you joining us today. My great pleasure to be here representing UIN, University Industry Innovation Network. Well, we really do share all the values, I think, with all the people that are represented here, because we truly do believe in the power of knowledge, and that this knowledge can be and should be co-created. And this is what basically we do at UIN. We position ourselves as leaders on university business collaboration, and we help both universities and companies to drive this collaboration and to create value out of research and education so that they can collaboratively make an impact on society. And one of the initiatives that we are currently running at the moment, amongst all of the research consultancy work that we do, is the project that I am leading, which is very close to my heart. The project is Revalorize. I will drop a link in a second. And this is something that I think one of the reasons why I'm here to start with, because this is one of the probably only initiatives, collaborative initiatives that specifically focuses on commercialization and valorization of social sciences and humanities research. And this is something that we have seen as a need to develop with our partners, because both in UIN and across all the organizations that we're working with, we do believe in the power of valorization, and that's the word that I guess I will be using most during my presentation. So it's not necessarily commercialization. If you don't mind, I will switch to valorization. This is something that we use in the Netherlands, but I think it captures pretty well what actually we are trying to do here, because yes, of course, we want to commercialize the research and create something tangible out of it that can also carry the commercial value. But we do believe that it's also about creating the social impact as well. And this is why I guess the word valorization is something that we think could be encompassing quite well also what the social sciences and humanities are trying to achieve. And well, as you notice, I don't have any slides, so I will just carry on with my speech here, but I'm very much looking forward to the discussion as well, and feel free to reach out also after the forum. But there will be a few insights that I thought I could share with you, because as part of this initiative and as part of the work that I do at UIN as a manager strategic initiatives, we do work a lot with universities trying to support the leaders, knowledge transfer professionals, but also the researchers through consultancy and training services. And one of the things that we realize is massively missing across all European countries is the support that is dedicated to social sciences and humanities researchers. And that was the main motivation for us to create this initiative, Revalorize Plus. And we try to enhance research impact of social sciences and humanities in two different ways. So the ambition is to create a training program that will be focusing specifically on social sciences and humanities researchers, and will be specifically focusing on valorization, commercialization, and entrepreneurship, bringing all those aspects together. And the second training program, or actually now we call it support program, is focused on professionals that are working in the universities and hoping and to help and support those researchers in their valorization efforts. And in order to get to that point, we actually have undertaken a research because we were trying to map the landscape, trying to understand what are the supporting mechanisms that exist out there on the European landscape. Also, what are the perhaps knowledge needs and skills gaps that the researchers may have in their valorization efforts. And also really trying to understand, is the topic being tackled at all? Or is it still mostly, being perceived rather as a STEM traditionally STEM-focused discipline when we talk about commercialization and valorization? And this is how basically this presentation that I'm giving you right now came about. So again, I would just probably like to start with an official definition that we are taking at UIN, as well as as part of this Revalorize initiative, is that we actually go a little bit beyond commercialization, and we try to include multiple activities that can encompass the work that the academics may do beyond to create the impact, and that will include all purposefully initiated activities by scholars aimed at making research findings available and usable for non-academic actors, in order to create significant, measurable, or observable impact beyond the academic context. And I think it resonates quite well with social sciences and humanities as well. And valorization in that sense can be perceived as the process of creating that value from social sciences and humanities knowledge by making this knowledge suitable and available for both economic and societal use, and translating that knowledge into either competitive products, services, processes, or might as well be an entrepreneurial activity. So this is basically kind of an umbrella definition that we take. And what we have seen is that valorization of social sciences and humanities and arts research is not a theme that universities deal with on a daily basis. Or maybe this is just not something that they will be focusing on in such dedicated manner. And the support mechanisms or training courses specifically designed for researchers in SSH is still very much limited across all European countries. Actually, I think I do believe that UK is doing much better than any other countries in EU. And it seems rather rare that researchers of these disciplines themselves would engage in valorization. But the funny, I think, and very ironic thing is that they may not necessarily understand that they may be already involved in such activities, because there's just a very big lack of misunderstanding of what valorization could mean. Just because, again, people tend to think about valorization, about commercialization as a strictly financially focused activity. Whereas I think, again, in social sciences and humanities, it's just very important to show those researchers that there are many more multiple pathways that they can undertake in order to make that happen. And that is, I guess, one of the most ironic findings that we have found, is that they do engage, but it's just they may not even recognize that they do. And, and they do it strictly intrinsically motivated manner. So they do it just because they want to do it, just because they really want to create an impact, or perhaps they want to also benefit their students in one or the other way through making use of their research results. But it's just not, they do not know that they are doing it. And therefore they also may not necessarily recognize that they need the support. And on the other hand, on the other side, we then have knowledge transfer professionals or entrepreneurship professionals, innovation professionals working in the universities, also trying to provide them that support. But in the end of the day, it turns out that they just speak different languages. They just perhaps need to align their expectations. They just need to understand that it's not only that we're trying to create spin-offs and the spin-outs, it's also just about making our research available for the use in a wider society. So that was one of the most interesting things that I personally found from this research. But then if we talk, I was asked to talk about a little bit about the landscape and the stakeholders that are involved. Well, valorization is an open field with a complex network of actors. And I think especially in social science, humanities and arts, it's becoming probably even more complex because there are so many different actors that are included into this multi-stakeholder collaboration. Just because also the nature of knowledge is I think, much more applicable when it comes to different fields and the subjects that can span from different arrays of focus. And but it seems clear that universities are trying to play a key role, and they should be. But it seems that also universities are aware why it is important to stimulate valorization amongst SSH researchers, because they, luckily by this day in European Union and European universities do understand the value, because that's a very big thing on the agenda. However, they still haven't really figured out how to provide and this is something that I think we are all still struggling with. And I think I'm running out of time. So David, please just let me know when I should stop. In any case, I just, maybe last thing that I wanted to say is that we have many exciting insights to share with you. So please just either get in touch with me or just visit our website, because we have few reports. And also, hopefully by the end of this year, we will already be able to pilot the first ever training program for SSH valorization. So thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Bazhan, and that was wonderful. Next, we have Holly Evans to share with us her observations of the ecosystem from down under. And if we could switch to Holly. Great. It's all yours.
Great. Hello. I am going to try and share my screen. I've just got a couple of slides because I thought it might be a bit easier to talk to. So we'll see. This is going to work. Okay. Can you see my screen? Yep. So I am from the Queensland University of Technology in Australia. It's the second largest university in Queensland. And as you can probably tell by our name, we have very strong links into industry. So I'm part of the Office for Industry Engagement, which also includes the Commercialisation Office, which were newly emerged in the last couple of years. I just wanted to give, I guess, a bit of broader context of the commercialisation and innovation context in Australia, because it is somewhat different. We have a very comparatively small investment in innovation within Australia, and it almost entirely focuses on biotech and medtech. So our team were actually looking at the Global Innovation Index in their recent report this year. And Australia ranks fairly low on that, 24th amongst 51 high-income economies. We're 42nd out of 51 for knowledge and technology outputs. And generally, we're producing less innovation outputs relative to innovation investments. I guess what's also struck me when I've done previous research with researchers, particularly in the UK, is that we generally have a bit more of a disconnect between our universities, our industry, our universities, government, and innovation hubs. Those connections don't exist in Australia to the same extent that they do in other parts of the world. So if you look at our research and development, it's very low comparatively to most other OECD countries, and we're at a 15-year low as well. It's hovering at about 1.7 to 1.6% of GDP. So if you compare that to OECD average of 2.4, it's quite low. What's been particularly interesting over the last 2 or 3 years in particular is that the research environment and the innovation environment has become very politicized, and I'd have to say somewhat hostile to SHAPE, or to most researchers here are still kind of referring to as HAS. So just a couple of interesting things to note. Our ARC, which is the equivalent of Research England, traditionally grants were awarded on peer review. What has happened now is that the minister has decided to use a veto power on many of these grants. And so in the last round, there were, I think, 12 that were vetoed, and they were all from SHAPE. So there's a definite sense, and then there was a discussion that followed in Parliament about, you know, what was the value of these research projects. What's also happened is that all of the research, well, all of the investment in commercialisation in Australia, along with most of the research funding, has been redirected to what are 6 manufacturing priorities. Again, this is making it really hard for social science and humanities researchers to get funding for any projects that are aimed more at social good. So it is happening, but it's becoming harder, and we're having to be more and more creative. So I guess a bit of a broader context. So in terms of some of the challenges and opportunities, in terms of our SHAPE ecosystem, I would say it's very much at its infancy. We're the first university in Australia that has a commercialisation team that is dedicated just to SHAPE. There are 4 of us. And so in a way, we are leading the way in Australia, but we've been very much looking to aspect and to what is happening in your part of the world, because from our perspective, that really is leading practice. We've been spending a lot of time in our office. We've had 2 years of this team working with SHAPE researchers. We're still finding that the bulk of researchers don't understand what commercialisation is. So we are doing yet another round of talks to centres about what is commercialisation, what does it look like in SHAPE. It's hard because there are fewer examples. So if you can't see it, you can't envisage what it would be like. And we're also finding through those talks that language, as mentioned before, is a huge barrier. Commercialisation is very much seen as a dirty word, and I get several emails a week about how we should be using words of research translation or impact. And so we're trying to change some of our forms and processes to incorporate, I guess, language, but also processes that are more friendly and inviting to SHAPE researchers. The other difficulty that we're finding is that it often takes a long time to sit with researchers, understand what they're doing, and then we see the research, the commercialisation potential, but often they don't. So it's taking some time to help researchers recognise the commercial impact. And then when we do find those researchers, it is hard to encourage them to invest the time that it takes to develop these commercial opportunities. Particularly in Australia, we're in an environment where pure research is valued and rewarded more than often these commercial activities. What I would say we're seeing in Australia in terms of SHAPE is pretty much all of the commercial opportunities that we're working on have developed from grants. So it's tools and toolkits that have been licensed, educational games, apps for health and wellbeing. And these have generally come out of research that has been undertaken through grants. So we're increasingly looking at other research, I guess, opportunities that can come from that. Through our discussions with both researchers but also with industry, though, we are noticing that there's a growing recognition of the potential of social science data and starting to think through creative ways in which that can be commercialised. But I'd say we're still we're at the beginning of our journey there. So I'd probably leave it there and then answer any questions in discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Holly. And we have about 11, 12 minutes left on our clock. So I wonder if Lisa, do you have any collected, good questions coming from the audience, or shall we actually get started? Lisa, feel free, because of my limitation of technology access, feel free to just chime in and read the question to us. All right, if without it, let's first go with one particular question. Lisa, are you there?
Sorry, I was just finding the unmute button. So I think we have a question that Britta received in the chat box. I'm not sure whether she could relay that one and invite anyone else to submit some questions into the chat box and we can feed that in.
Sure.
Hi, David. Hi, everybody. Holly, you were giving some examples of where you're seeing opportunities and the kinds of projects you're seeing commercialized. You mentioned educational games, tools and toolkits, and apps for health. I'm wondering if David and Balzan, if you are seeing kind of similar outputs or pathways for commercialization in the US and in Europe, or if there's even other things you might add to that list in terms of where there might be opportunities emerging.
I don't know about Balzan, but in the US, yes, I think anything related to some of the societal benefits, for example, the education sector and also the health sector, especially those are the sectors where the government or policy decisions really make a huge difference. When I was working at Stanford, for example, several prominent SHAPE commercialization projects, they all had some very similar kind of a background, that the subject matter being actually mandated by either state government or federal government or some other consortium of the industry. In other words, all of a sudden you have a lot of captive users. They have to use the kind of solutions that you're offering in the education sector, in the healthcare sector, whether it's teachers training, teachers certification, or healthcare workers evaluation, assessment, or effectiveness assessment of healthcare intervention. And those tend to be really, I would say, low-hanging fruits for SHAPE commercialization. But Balzan, do you have any other thoughts?
Yes, absolutely. So maybe just again going back to the notion of commercialization versus valorization, we see multiple pathways of how this impact can be achieved, and that can, might as well include student entrepreneurship focused initiatives, some maybe student and staff mobility related initiatives of lifelong learning programs, but also it might as well relate to consulting services that the academics might be able to provide based upon the research results that they have, and also the joint research initiatives that they may be undertaking. When it comes to the discipline specifically, what we have seen is that just like Holly has mentioned, and David as well, educational field is quite predominant, I would say. Everything when it comes to gamification or educational support and resources is something that we have seen quite clearly. Also, to my, I guess, positive surprise, we could see that arts being quite dominant as well, because there's a lot going on when it comes to work with museums, exhibitions, and art fairs. And this is something that I think is excellent, really, because that has been overlooked so massively over the past years, whereas now the collaborative work with universities and different types of NGOs is being picked up by the universities. And I think with health, I would also agree, but I think this is where we see a great deal of multidisciplinarity coming together, because this is where I think that the greatest impact can be achieved when STEM disciplines and SSH disciplines can actually come together and utilize this creativity and this new knowledge that can be co-created.
Great. If there are other questions, Britta and Lisa, we can entertain them. Otherwise, I would also go on to another topic that was actually touched upon by the two panelists. One particular thing that I noted was that Holly shared with us some of the funding agencies' decision or even veto some specifically shape subject matter of funding, which is very sad. And one particular difference that I have observed between the UK system and the US system is that here in the UK, we are fortunate enough. We have specific funding agencies such as ESRC focusing on our area of funding for commercialization. And we just don't have the same thing in the US. In the US, research funding tends to be heavily focused on federal government funding. And most of the money comes from the top level federal agencies, NIH, Department of Defense, Department of Energy. But the relatively speaking, the shape subject matter is very thinly financed. And specifically in terms of valorization or commercialization, there isn't any equivalent agency like ESRC. And therefore, I do think that we have a very unique opportunity here in the UK. But what is your perspective, perhaps in the rest of Europe, Bazhan?
I think that is completely spot on, that there is perhaps no dedicated support that will specifically be emphasizing the focus on social sciences, humanities, and arts. We see some initiatives arising also that are driven by the European Commission. The whole notion of valorization, I mean, just now, the valorization week is happening here in EU, where different initiatives are being discussed. But what we have noticed, again, that this game around multidisciplinarity can actually come in handy, just because you can always make an emphasis that through your social sciences and humanities has, or shape, or whatever we want to call it, if you can somehow outline and make a pitch that the work that is being done can greatly contribute to the multidisciplinary work also with other disciplines, and also contribute to the sustainable development. This is also quite big on the agenda. I think this is how perhaps we can play a little bit with those funding mechanisms in that sense, because it is indeed a lack of that dedicated support, not only across the universities, but also on a political level. But I'm sure there are some dedicated initiatives that probably we may not be even aware of when it comes to commercialization or entrepreneurship specifically, but more so from this bigger valorization angle. I think there are not many that exist.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions coming from the audience? Britta or Lisa?
Not yet, David.
Okay, I would then ask Bazhan or Holly to comment on the following. We have also observed, both in the US and here in the UK, that as we deal with shape subject matter, it's the kind of work that a tech transfer or knowledge transfer office conducts really shifts dramatically from the STEM-oriented TTOs. In the STEM-oriented TTOs, you manage a lot of inventions. Your focus tends to be on the inventions and then licensing existing technologies. And entrepreneurship is just a side show, not the most important part. But when it comes to shape subject matter, all of a sudden we don't have existing technology cases on the shelf that we could market. There are no existing outside users dying to get access to our technology cases. So we actually tend to focus a lot more of our work on entrepreneurship. Hence, the focus of, for example, ARC Accelerator within the Aspect Network. Are you seeing similar things down in Australia, Holly, and also the rest of Europe, Baozhan?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. We are actually just starting an innovation competition in the hope of bringing out and driving some of that entrepreneurial activity. The other thing I think I would say is a lot of the activity we are seeing is multidisciplinary. So in terms of health being a growing area, we found our designers in particular are actually very much in need. Late last year, I worked on bringing together a large centre that basically brought designers and healthcare professionals together to co-design better systems, better med tech devices, all those sorts of things. And we were really struck at just how much industry needed and wanted to invest in the capabilities that our designers had.
Great, thank you. Baozhan?
I would also echo what Holly just said. I think this is pretty much the case here as well. And we also see the notion of social entrepreneurship becoming quite more prevalent when it comes to shape disciplines, because it just fits the nature, you know. And one of the interesting findings that we also had when we were talking to researchers, asking what kind of support do you need, or what is it that you actually would like to have at your disposal? All they said that they want to have is the clarity where to go to in the university, because they are not even sure whether knowledge transfer professionals can help them, just because the notion of, you know, STEM focused support is so prevalent. They are not even sure whether they will be able to get this support. Whereas I do believe that they can. At least these people would be able to, you know, connect them to the right stakeholders if they are not able to do it themselves. So that is one thing. And second thing is also that they would just also like to see potential pathways and potential case studies. So I guess the work that we would need to do across, you know, our different organizations that are dealing with the topic is just to promote the role models a little bit more, make sure that we do our communication work in such a way that the researchers can actually see how commercialization and shape disciplines can happen, what are the activities, what are the potential pathways, and also who are these people who can share those experiences. It was a hard work for us to identify those lighthouse examples. It was very hard, but you know, we managed, and actually those individuals, I think, kind of play a great role as ambassadors, helping us to, I guess, make this topic more higher on the agenda.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you, Baozhan. I think we are already 2 minutes into overtime, so we should yield the floor back to Sean. But thank you so much for sharing not only the challenges that our shape valorization is facing, but also some unique opportunities indeed. So it gives us a lot of hope to look forward to. And thank you so much, Holly and Baozhan. And we will be joining you later in the breakout sessions as well. Thank you.